you start it with the time you got shot.
Yeah.
By a rubber bullet, I should add, but that's still no fun.
Right.
For those who don't know the story, could you walk us through what happened?
Yeah, it was a Saturday after George Floyd had been killed. I'd been in Minneapolis because I cover these things often, the civil unrest or big stories domestically. And it was an unusual one because I did have a bulletproof vest on and I was carrying a gas mask, which I have never done in this country before. I have that gear for other assignments that I go on. So it was a very rough week, as you recall. There had been a police station that had been burned down. There were sort of running confrontations between police and protesters. But on the Saturday night, it wasn't that way. And for some reason, in the middle of a very quiet march that I was toward the back of, we were covering it, police and National Guard came into the intersection in front of us and started shooting flashbangs and tear gas and rubber bullets. And the crowd largely separated. And now there's nobody between the police lines and my crew. And they were shooting and they were doing these things. There was really nobody to shoot at that point. And my security guy was saying, they're shooting at us. And so we were pulling back. And as we were doing this live on TV, I took one to the knee. It's one of those things that shocks you when it happens. So you're running on adrenaline. I didn't actually realize until much later that night that it had gone through my pants and my skin. And you're right, it's a rubber bullet, but that's a rubber covered bullet. So it was just, the whole thing was fascinating and not what I expected to be doing with my career at this point.
How painful is that?
I describe it as taking a hockey puck to the shin.
Puck, okay.
The good news is it was in my shin. It was below my knee, a little higher, and it can do real damage. And that night, someone was shot here in their eye. They lost their eyesight.
Yeah.
So the thing about a rubber bullet is if it gets you in a place that you can take it, you're okay. It can be a very dangerous thing.
Did you sense that was an accident? Because there was a moment afterwards where you heard someone say something that led you potentially to believe that maybe someone was shooting at journalists
so
there.
A couple things happened. One is we retreated and we got to another intersection and something very similar happened, but there were no other people around. It was just us as journalists. There was a number of different press crews that were there trying to make their way back. And we yelled, "We're media," and we put our hands up because we, not knowing whether the first thing was an accident or not, we wanted to make sure there wasn't a second one. And someone yelled back, "We don't care," and started firing. Nobody got hit the second time. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think the truth might lie in the middle. When you shoot someone at that distance, you should be using a scope. We had a camera, and my cameraman's about 6'3". I think they knew we were media, and subsequent discovery has learned that night there was some sense of the police going after the media. But I don't know the answer to that, and maybe one day I'll find out.
Not something that you want to hear about or see in America. And
no, that's
you
the
always
weird part.
Expect.
Yeah, correct. That's not something we want to see or hear about. And as a viewer or listener or reader, you should never want that to happen. That shouldn't have to do with any kinds of politics or anything like that. You don't want your media impeded. It is one of the remaining great things about our country. It is, when you look at other countries, which I follow very closely, and their devolution, often media and the distribution of information, curtailing that is often one of the first steps. So we just don't want that to happen in America.
Now, Trump has spoken about that moment frequently.
Yeah.
He did in 2020. And did you draw any connections between the atmosphere that Trump was setting at the top about his treatment of the press and between actions like that? Do you think there are any parallels there, or that it's connected at all?
I do. I'll start by saying Trump's rendition of this, which he used at a number of rallies that fall before the election, is much better than what actually
somewhat
happened.
Theatrical.
It's quite theatrical. It's quite good, and with each rally it got a little bit better. But yeah, there is a connection, right? It's a permission structure. It has worked in other parts of the world, whether you're talking about the other or you're talking about immigrants, which are often a target, or you're talking about the media. We've seen it in Rwanda, we've seen it in the Balkans, we certainly saw it in World War II, where once you sort of dehumanize or otherize a group, it opens up a permission structure for people to act a certain way toward them. So I do think there was that overlap, that idea that the media are the enemy of the people, the media are the enemy of police. Remember that whole movement after George Floyd got killed, the Black Lives Matter movement, did feel to some people like it was people versus the police. And so Donald Trump was taking a side. I don't think that had to be a people versus police thing. I don't think that good policing or good anything needs to be drawn along those lines. But we are in a time around the world and in America where that's what happens. Every issue, everybody's got to have a hot take and they've got to take a position on it. In my view, good policing is an evolution. There are issues that we need to solve, and some of that comes from training, some of that comes from spending money, what we spend on policing, and some of that comes from community relations. Some of it may be racism, but it's nuanced and it's complicated. Donald Trump has a mastery for removing nuance from any topic, whether he's right or wrong, whether he understands it or he doesn't. So I think that in removing nuance from the idea that the enemy or the media are the enemy of the people, you do create a permission structure to open the media up for attack, both rhetorically and physically. And remember, that is just not something we grew up with understanding. The fact that you had a media badge or a media cap or some sort of media identification was meant to protect you in all circumstances, everywhere in the world during civil conflict or during war. And that has been deteriorating for some years. Donald Trump's he didn't start that, but he's certainly riding that wave.
Right, it's something that you hear about in Russia.
Correct.
We're hearing about it now in India.
Yes.
Not something you expect to hear in the United States.
Correct.
With that in mind, we're obviously barreling towards the 2024 election. What do you think the stakes are for journalists if Trump is reelected? Is that something you worry about and you've been focusing on your show?
I think about it. Kash Patel, who's a key Trump spokesperson who may have a cabinet position if Donald Trump becomes president, has said, we will go after journalists civilly and criminally, which I think is interesting. What you see in places like the ones you described, other parts of the world, two things. One is they do sometimes go after journalists criminally. This has happened to Maria Ressa in the Philippines, who has won a Nobel Prize for her work in terms of criticizing the government. We hear stories about it at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Journalists who walk around their own countries always with a bulletproof vest because they're worried about the government. But the harassment is another department. It's the idea that suddenly you're getting audited or suddenly your family's getting phone calls or threats. You don't have to implement laws. You just have to scare enough journalists off to say, go cover something else. Go back to covering economics like I did. Go cover sports. Go cover cooking or whatever the case is. Don't cover us critically. But this fits into something that Donald Trump has been saying about going after his enemies. He uses the term retribution. I am your retribution, which sort of mocks what Mussolini said. I'm your avenger. So I do think about this. I think if you fall into the category of critic, that might mean journalist, might mean opposition leader, might mean prosecutor, might mean witness, might mean juror, might mean anybody. I think there's some threat that Donald Trump will come for you, or the Trump administration will come for you.
I'm sure I'm going to get yelled at about this, but from what I recall, the first Trump term, there was a lot of bluster about cracking down on the press.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of action
Correct.
from the Trump administration.
Yeah.
There were, a guy sent pipe bombs to CNN.
Yeah.
And there were attacks on journalists, but Rachel Maddow, your colleague, was on The View, said that the camps that Trump is talking about setting up for undocumented immigrants, who's to say that journalists won't be sent to those camps? The View is fretting about The View getting canceled.
Right.
That's obviously lower stakes, but do you see a possibility, not just a possibility, but a likelihood that the bluster that Trump has always shown on the campaign trail and positioning networks like CNN and MSNBC as his opponent could go beyond that, and that there actually could be concrete action taken against the press in a way that goes beyond mere threats?
Yeah, I think it's two distinct issues, and they're important to distinguish. The first part, and Timothy Snyder from Yale talks about this. He's the author of a book on tyranny. Authoritarian experts discuss the fact that sometimes you don't have to do the concrete stuff. You just have to put it out there, right? If you say enough time that the media is the enemy of the people, you'll find enough people like the pipe bomb guy who say, let me take care of this myself, because people have beef with the media. Right? Some of it's legitimate. And then there's the actual stuff that you can do to try and silence the media. And that can be lawsuits, that can be, Donald Trump has talked about taking away our license. We don't have a license. We're a cable TV channel. There's no license. But he's talked about capital punishment for the heads of our companies. So I don't know. I don't know that you could get that far, but I don't know that we should be trying that. This is the country where our First Amendment, not our 13th Amendment, our First Amendment is about the establishment of state religion, the ability to peaceably demonstrate, and freedom of the press. It is something we hold dear. There are parts of the world where that's not primary. it is primary for us. So I don't know where one connects to the other, but I do think that this idea of engendering or encouraging stochastic violence because you tell people the media is the enemy might be all the danger you need. And really good autocrats in history have been able to balance this line between things that they actually do, jailing people, rounding people up, and doing, prosecuting them, with this idea of let the people take care of it. Let people start to hate journalists and mistreat them and threaten them, and you might take care of the problem that way.
January 6th, a great example of that, obviously.
Right.
Trump
Correct.
didn't need to storm the Capitol.
Correct.
He just needed
Right.
to tell the supporters that
Yes.
the election was stolen. Fragility of social fabric, I feel like, is a big theme that courses through your book.
Yeah.
From your family moving to South Africa and experiencing apartheid, fighting against it, and leaving South Africa in a place where South Africa was worse off than when they arrived, to no fault of their own, of course. Do you think that we take for granted the stability that we have in the United States? And was that something that sort of alarmed you when you were reporting out this book?
Yes, 100%. And that sort of ties to that opening chapter. I think we do take it for granted. My book talks a lot about the responsibilities of citizenship and the idea that being cynical about politics is a luxury that exists with people who have never had to live outside of a political system, or without a political system. If you've been outside, if you haven't had a political system, as my parents did not enjoy growing up, you crave it, you want it. It's blustery, it's noisy, it's frustrating, it's a lot of things, but it is actually our responsibility. The responsibility of citizenship is not just simply voting, or, as I write in my book, jury duty. That's the basics. That's the price of admission. It is looking at your country and saying, how do I leave this thing better than I found it? And if there are fissures, if there are rips in the fabric, it's on me to try and fix them. Little ones in ways that I can. You can't fix the whole world. The world feels like a boiling pot right now. Dried kindling, perhaps, where if somebody throws a match, lots of things can go wrong. And in a lot of parts of the world, things are going wrong. I do think that we have the ability to keep democracy on track in the United States, but I think we have to accept the fact that democracy, because it exists, doesn't just sustain itself. It takes work and input by us, the citizens, and that is a responsibility we've got to take seriously.